You never think something like this will happen to you. You read about creepy encounters or hear about them in films, but you think, that's not real life. Well, I can tell you, it bloody well is. Last weekend, my family and I had the most terrifying experience of our lives while driving to a ski lodge for a winter holiday. I am still shaken up and I can't stop replaying it in my head. It started off as a typical road trip. Me, my wife Emma, and our two kids, Jake, 8, and Mia, 5. We were taking a scenic route through some woodland roads to avoid motorways. It was getting dark and the GPS was glitchy in the middle of nowhere, but we were in good spirits. The kids were half asleep in the back, and Emma was scrolling through her phone while constantly waiting for a signal. About an hour into the woods, the car started pulling to one side. I knew straight away it was the tire. I swore under my breath, pulled over, and sure enough, the front passenger side tire was completely flat. It wasn't the first flat I've had, so I thought, no big deal, I'll just swap it with the spare. I told Emma to stay in the car with the kids while I sorted it. The woods around us were pitch black, and the only light came from the car's hazard lights. It was eerily quiet, no wind, no animals, nothing. I opened the boot and got out the jack, trying to ignore how creepy it felt being out there. As I was getting the spare tire, I heard a twig snap in the woods behind me. I froze, holding my breath, listening. There was nothing but silence. I told myself it was just an animal and went back to work, trying to hurry up. Then I heard it again, another snap, this time closer. I straightened up, my heart pounding, and stared into the trees. I couldn't see a bloody thing. "Hello?" I called out, half hoping no one would answer. Of course no one did. I was starting to feel on edge. I bent down to get the spare tire out when I heard it, a rapid crunching of leaves and snapping branches. Someone was running towards me from the woods. I didn't think, I just dropped the tire, slammed the boot shut and bolted for the car. I jumped in, locked the doors and told Emma to lock hers. She was panicked, asking what was wrong, but before I could answer, bang! Someone slammed their hands against my window. It was a man, maybe mid-40s, with a scruffy beard and wild eyes. He was yelling something, but I couldn't make out the words. His face was twisted with anger or something worse. He yanked at the door handle, trying to get in. The kids had woken up from the banging and started screaming. Emma was yelling for me to drive. I didn't care about the flat tire anymore. I just started the car and floored it. The man banged on the back of the car as we sped off, but I didn't look back. The sound of the flat tire thumping against the road was deafening, but I kept going, swerving down the dark, winding road. It took what felt like hours to reach a town. The tire was completely shredded by the time we pulled into a garage. The mechanic took one look at the car and asked what happened. I told him everything and he just shook his head. We called the police, but I don't think they took us seriously. They said it was probably a drifter or someone hunting in the woods. But why the hell would someone sprint at a car and try to break in? Why was he so angry? I've never been one for talking about stuff like this, but what happened to me last week still has me shaken. I don't know what to think about it. I was driving cross-country for work and decided to stop for the night and could only find this dingy little roadside motel. It was cheap with flickering neon sign, cracked pavement in the car park, and a lobby that smells like stale cigarettes and cleaning chemicals. It was late and I was knackered, so I wasn't too picky. I just wanted a place to crash. The bloke at reception gave me the key to room 7. It wasn't much. Just a small room with outdated wallpaper and a bed that looked like it hadn't been comfortable since the 80s. But it was fine. I threw my stuff down, had a shower and got ready to sleep. At around 1 a.m, I started hearing noises from the room next door. It was just faint talking and murmurs. Motels are noisy and people come and go at all hours. I figured someone had checked in late. But the noises didn't stop. They got louder. Banging on the walls, what sounded like muffled shouting, and even something that might have been furniture being dragged across the floor. It was starting to piss me off because I was dead tired, so I knocked on the wall and shouted, "Oi, keep it down, will you?" The noises stopped completely. I lay back down, feeling a bit smug that I'd managed to shut them up. But then I heard a scream. It wasn't a normal scream. It was this blood-curdling wail that made my hair stand on end. It was coming from the room next door. The same room that had just gone quiet. I shot up in bed, my heart racing. The banging started again, harder this time, like someone was smashing furniture against the walls. There was more screaming, then this awful wet sound, like something being torn apart. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw on my shoes, grabbed my key and bolted to the reception desk. The guy behind the counter looked up from his newspaper like I was interrupting his nap. I told him about the noise, the screaming, the banging. He frowned and said, "That's impossible, room 8's empty." "No, it's not," I snapped. "I've been hearing it for the past hour." He grabbed a key and said, "Come on, I'll show you." We walked back to room 8. My heart was pounding as he unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room was spotless, the bed was neatly made, the furniture was in place, and there wasn't a single sign that anyone had been in there. No scratches, no dents, no blood, nothing. It looked like it hadn't been touched in weeks. I stood there feeling like an idiot, but also scared out of my mind. The receptionist gave me this look like he thought I was mad and said, "See? Empty. Try to get some sleep." He locked the door and walked off, muttering under his breath. I went back to my room, but I didn't sleep a wink. The noises didn't come back. I kept staring at the wall, half expecting it to start banging again. The next morning I checked out as early as I could and got back on the road. As I was leaving, I noticed something I hadn't seen the night before. Room 8's door had deep scratches near the bottom, like someone or something had been clawing at it. I didn't stop to ask the receptionist about it. I just drove. We were just a group of friends out for a weekend trip in the woods. There were 5 of us, all uni students looking to escape coursework and deadlines. It was supposed to be fun, a bit of hiking, some beers by the fire, and sleeping under the stars. Nothing crazy. The first night went off without a hitch. We set up camp in a clearing, cooked some sausages, and stayed up late, laughing and telling stupid stories. I remember feeling peaceful for the first time in ages. The woods were quiet except for the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustling of the wind. The next day, we decided to explore further into the forest. We wanted to find a new spot to camp, something more secluded, away from the usual trails. After a few hours of trekking, we came across an area we thought looked good, but found another campsite. At first glance, it looked abandoned. The tents were still standing, but they had these jagged rips like they'd been slashed with claws. Supplies were scattered everywhere: clothes, sleeping bags, even some personal items like books and a watch. There was food cooking on a fire, the flames low but still alive, like whoever had been there left in the middle of a meal. It was eerie. We called out, half expecting someone to pop out of the woods, but there was no response, just silence. We walked around the site, trying to make sense of it. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, just chaos. It looked like the campers had vanished into thin air. Then we started noticing the belongings. One of the sleeping bags looked exactly like mine. Same color, same tear in the corner from a drunken trip I'd taken months ago. Then someone pointed out a hoodie lying near one of the tents. It was the same hoodie my mate Tom had been wearing earlier. It wasn't just similar, it was his hoodie. That's when the panic set in. We started looking closer, and it was all there. Sam's rucksack, Liz's water bottle, Emily's trainers. Everything matched what we'd brought with us. Even the tents were identical to ours, down to the patched up holes and mismatched poles, and then the fire. The pot hanging over the flames contained the same half-eaten stew we'd made the night before. The ladle sitting next to it had Liz's initials scratched into the handle. It was our campsite, but it couldn't be. We were miles away from where we'd set up the night before, and we hadn't pitched up anywhere yet. This didn't make any sense. No one said anything, we just started backing away. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my torch. Every instinct in my body was screaming to run, but I couldn't stop staring at the scene in front of us. Tom was the first to bolt. He turned and took off down the trail without a word, and the rest of us followed. I don't even remember how long we ran. The forest felt never-ending. When we finally reached the edge of the woods, we collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. No one spoke. We just sat there staring at the tree line. We eventually made it back to the car and drove straight home. None of us has talked about it since. I'd heard about the new cave system through a diving group I follow. It was just discovered off the coast, a labyrinth of tunnels and air pockets that no one had fully explored yet. I should have known better than to go alone, but I couldn't resist. The thought of being one of the first people to map it out was too tempting. The entrance was narrow and dark, but I'd expected that. The initial descent was uneventful, just the usual tight spaces and jagged rock formations. I kept my light steady, checking my depth and watching my air levels. After about 40 minutes, I found something incredible. A massive air pocket. I surfaced carefully, removing my regulator. The pocket was huge, like a hidden room buried beneath the ocean. The water was eerily still, and the walls of the cave gleamed with condensation. I was so fascinated that I didn't notice the movement at first. It was just a flicker, something large and dark passing below me. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a seal, a big fish. I felt the water shift, the faintest ripple against my legs. Whatever it wasn't swimming away, it was circling. I scanned the water with my torch, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then it surfaced. It wasn't human. I don't even know how to describe it properly. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes were huge and black, reflecting the beam of my torch like polished stones. It had limbs, but they were long. The way it moved made my stomach turn. It stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Then it started moving closer. Panic set in, and I didn't think. I just dove back into the water. My gear heavy, my swimming got clumsy as I pushed myself through the narrow tunnels. Every sound, the hiss of my regulator, the clinking of my tank against the rock, felt deafening. I was sure it was following me. I didn't dare look back. By the time I reached the cave entrance, my lungs were burning and my limbs felt like lead. I kicked as hard as I could, bursting out into open water and swimming straight for the surface. When I finally broke through, gasping for air, I felt a fleeting sense of relief, but then I turned back towards the cave. I saw it. It was just a shadow, barely visible in the murky water, but it was there, at the mouth of the cave, watching me. I don't know what it was or how long it had been there. I only know that I was in its territory and it let me go. There's something living in that cave, and I was stupid enough to disturb it. It all started as a viral challenges you see online. Someone posted about the old Burnwood Penitentiary, which had been abandoned for decades and was scheduled for demolition in a few weeks. Apparently it used to house some of the most dangerous criminals in the country, and its warden was infamous for being sadistic. Rumors of torture, people disappearing, that sort of thing. The challenge was simple: spend one night in the prison and win £10,000. It was to be live streamed, no strings attached, just a thrill-seeking stunt to entertain some sick audience online. There were 5 of us who took up the offer. We didn't know each other before, just strangers looking for easy money and a bit of excitement. We met up at the gates just as it was getting dark. The place looked like something straight out of a horror film. Rusted metal bars, crumbling walls, windows broken like jagged teeth. It stank of mildew and decay, and the air felt heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. Once we were inside, we split up to explore. That was part of the deal. You couldn't stick together all night. Each of us was supposed to stream our own experience. I stuck to the lower levels at first, walking through what must have been the old processing area. The walls were covered in graffiti, dirt and mold. The first hour was uneventful, just creepy noises from the wind and my own footsteps echoing back at me. But then things started to get weird. I was in one of the cell blocks, pointing my torch down the rows of rusted bars, when I heard footsteps. They weren't mine. They were heavy, like boots on concrete. I called out, thinking that it was one of the others messing around, but no one answered. When I turned back towards the corridor, I swear I saw a shadow move across the far end. It was quick, almost like someone ducking out of sight. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. It had to be one of the others trying to scare me, right? Not long after, my phone buzzed with a notification. One of the streams had gone offline. That wasn't supposed to happen. I tried messaging the group chat, but no one replied. By midnight, things had gone completely off the rails. I started hearing things, chains rattling, whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The air felt colder, and there was this faint smell like burnt hair or singed flesh that made me gag. My torch flickered a few times, and every time it did, I thought I saw something at the edge of the light. I tried to find the others, but the place was a maze, and with only a flashlight I was lost. Then the screaming. It started as a faint, distant noise, but it grew louder as the night went on. It wasn't just one voice, it was several, all of them shrill and desperate. I heard someone shouting my name, but when I followed the sound, there was no one there. At some point, I found one of the other contestants' phones lying on the ground. The screen was cracked, and the stream was still running, but the feed was just static. There was no sign of them. By 4 a.m., I was the only one left. I didn't need confirmation, I just knew. The others were gone, swallowed up by that place. I kept moving, trying to find an exit, but I could feel something following me. I didn't see it properly until the very end. I turned a corner and found myself face to face with him, the warden. At least I think it was him. He didn't look like a normal person. His skin was stretched tight over his face, his eyes were black pits, and he wore this old tattered uniform covered in stains. He didn't speak. His voice was this low, guttural growl. He was telling me I didn't belong there, that none of us did. I don't remember how I got out. The next thing I knew, I was stumbling down the road outside the prison, my phone dead and my clothes torn. I didn't stick around to look back. The demolition went ahead a few days later, and no one's mentioned the challenge since. The videos and posts about it have vanished, almost like they were wiped clean. I'm the only one who made it out, but I haven't told anyone the full story, not until now. I've lived in Alder Creek my whole life. It's a small remote logging town tucked deep in the woods. Nothing much ever happens here, and we like it that way. Everyone knows everyone, and the most excitement we get is when the occasional tourist wanders through. At least that's how it used to be. About a month ago, the lights started. No one paid much attention or seemed to notice them, though a few people mentioned seeing strange flickering out in the sky above the trees at night. Green and blue lights like the aurora borealis. But we're nowhere near the Arctic Circle, so it didn't make sense. Then it wasn't just lights. There were sounds too, a low humming that seemed to vibrate right through your chest if you stood outside long enough. That's when the dreams began. The first time I had one, I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. In the dream, I was standing in a field, staring up at the lights as they swirled above me. They got brighter and brighter until they were blinding. Then I wasn't in the field anymore. I was somewhere else. The air felt thin, and everything was so cold. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, but I could hear voices all around me, speaking a language I didn't understand. I wasn't the only one. Nearly everyone in town started having similar dreams. People said it felt too vivid, almost real, like it wasn't a dream at all. Some of them remembered seeing shapes, tall, thin figures with elongated limbs and eyes that seemed to burn right through you. Others said they felt hands on them, probing, testing, like they were being examined. And then the disappearances began. It started with Ed, one of the loggers. His wife said he went out to check on some equipment late one night and never came back. The next day, we found his truck parked by the mill, keys still in the ignition, but no sign of him. Then it was the Miller family. All three of them, parents and their teenage son, gone without a trace. Their front door was wide open, dinner still on the table, like they'd just walked out in the middle of the evening. We called the police, but Alder Creek's so far out that it took days for them to send anyone. By then, more people were gone. It was like the town was slowly being emptied. We started keeping watch at night, taking shifts to patrol the streets. But the lights kept coming, brighter and closer each time. The dreams got worse too. It wasn't just the feeling of being taken anymore. People started waking up with strange marks on their skin, circular burns or thin straight cuts that didn't bleed. One night, I was out on watch with a few others when we saw it. A light, brighter than anything I've ever seen, hovering just above the tree line. It wasn't like a helicopter or plane. It didn't make any sound except for that low hum. We just stood there, frozen, watching as it moved closer and closer. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my bed, my clothes still on, dirt on my boots. I couldn't remember how I got there, and the others on watch that night, they were gone. Now, Alder Creek feels like a ghost town. There are only a handful of us left, and we don't talk about what's happening anymore. What's the point? No one believes us. They think we're just some superstitious hicks making up stories. But the lights are real, the dreams are real, and whatever's taking people, it's not done yet. I never thought much about loneliness before I took the job at Greyhaven Point Lighthouse. It was remote, sure, perched on the jagged cliffs of a forgotten stretch of coastline. The pay wasn't much, but I liked the solitude. I liked the way the sea stretched endlessly in every direction, its power both comforting and terrifying. I kept the light burning, maintained the equipment, and spent my evenings with a good book or scribbling thoughts into a journal. The wind howled most nights, a constant reminder of how isolated I was. It wasn't until my second month that things started to change. The first time I saw one, I thought it was a hallucination. It was a stormy night, and the waves were crashing violently against the rocks below. Through the sheets of rain, I spotted a ship, a massive wooden galleon. Its sails were tattered, its hull dark and weathered, but it was moving steadily towards the lighthouse. I panicked. I switched the foghorn on, trying to warn them of the danger. But just as it neared the rocks, the ship faded and vanished. I didn't know what I saw, but it put me on edge. A week later, it happened again. This time, it was a steamer, its iron hull battered by waves, its deck lit faintly with lanterns. I could see figures moving on board, frantic silhouettes running to and fro as if they were trying to steer the doomed vessel away from the rocks. Again I sounded the horn, and again it vanished before impact. I now knew these weren't just illusions. I started digging through old records in the lighthouse's dusty office. That's when I learned about the tragedies. Over the centuries, dozens of ships had wrecked along this stretch of coastline. The records detailed each one, the names of the vessels, the dates they sank, the lives lost. Some of the descriptions matched what I'd seen. A Spanish galleon lost in 1623, an iron steamer sunk during a storm in 1871. Each sighting lined up with a ship from the past. It didn't stop there. The appearances became more frequent, and they weren't always at night. I'd see ghostly schooners gliding silently through the mist in broad daylight, fishing boats that vanished beneath phantom waves, a cruise liner split in two, with screams that echoed faintly across the water. What unnerved me most were the figures on the ships. They seemed oblivious to me, trapped in their endless reenactments of disaster. But as the days passed, I began to feel like they were aware of my presence. When the ships appeared, I'd catch glimpses of faces staring towards the lighthouse, hollow eyes fixed on me. One night, during a particularly violent storm, I made the mistake of leaving the lighthouse to investigate. I was determined to see where the ships were coming from. I climbed down the cliffside path to the rocky shore, rain lashing against me. That's when I saw them. The wreckage, broken masts, rusted metal, splintered wood, all scattered across the rocks like offerings to the sea. The tide pulled at the debris, dragging it back into the blackness. Among the wreckage were bodies, not solid but pale and translucent, their faces frozen in terror. As I stared, one of them turned its head towards me, then another and another. Their mouths opened in silent screams, their hands reaching out as if to drag me into the cold depths with them. I ran back to the lighthouse, slipping on the wet rocks, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I haven't been back to the shore since. We should have stayed on the main road. That's the thought that haunts me every time I close my eyes. We'd been driving through a blizzard. Thick, suffocating snow blanketing everything in sight. The GPS suggested a shortcut, and we foolishly took it, eager to shave time off the long drive to the cabin. The narrow road quickly turned treacherous, winding through dense woods with snow piling higher by the second. We never saw the patch of black ice until it was too late. The car spun, sliding uncontrollably before crashing into a snowbank. The impact wasn't hard enough to hurt us, but the engine refused to start after that. We were miles from anywhere, trapped in a desolate white wasteland with the wind howling like a living thing outside. At first we tried to stay calm. We bundled up in every layer we had and huddled together in the car, hoping someone might drive by. But as the hours passed and the cold seeped through the windows, the fear began to set in. There was no phone signal, no sound of any other cars, just the relentless storm. Around midnight, something changed. I was half asleep when I heard it, a faint crunching sound like boots on fresh snow. My partner heard it too. We stared out into the darkness, squinting through the frosted windows, but there was nothing there, just endless white. The sound came again, circling the car. We tried to rationalize it, maybe an animal, but deep down I knew better. Animals didn't walk like that. When the sound stopped, the silence was worse. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie stillness that pressed against my ears. That's when the knocking started, soft taps on the back window. I turned around so fast my neck cracked, but there was nothing there. Just a handprint. A perfect human-shaped handprint melting slightly as the frost ate away at its edges. We panicked. My partner wanted to leave the car, to try and find help, but I refused. Something was out there, something watching us. I could feel it, like the way you know when someone's standing too close, even if you can't see them. Hours passed, though it felt like days. The cold was unbearable, and I could barely feel my fingers or toes anymore. Every so often we'd hear the crunch of snow again. Once I swear I saw a face pressed against the glass, but it vanished before I could truly process what I was looking at. Desperation drove us to leave the car as dawn approached, though the sky never truly lightened. We wrapped ourselves in blankets and trudged through the snow, hoping to find a road or a house, anything. But the tracks we left behind didn't last long. The snow covered them almost as soon as we made them. The woods felt endless, closing in on us as we walked. Every so often, I'd glance back and see shapes moving between the trees, keeping pace with us. At one point, we found footprints, large, bare footprints leading off into the deeper forest. We followed them. I don't know why. Maybe we thought that they'd lead to someone who could help, or maybe we were just too scared to stay still. The tracks wound through the trees, weaving in ways that didn't make sense, until we came to a small clearing. There was something in the snow, a figure crouched and still, its back to us. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and it seemed thin, as if the cold had carved it down to nothing. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure slowly turned its head, and even now I can't describe what I saw. Its face wasn't human, it wasn't anything. We bolted. We didn't look back, even when the sound of crunching snow behind us turned into full-blown pursuit. The thing didn't move like a person. It was faster, more animalistic. We eventually stumbled onto a road, barely able to stand from exhaustion. A snowplow found us not long after, though it felt like an eternity. The driver said he hadn't seen anyone else out there. We never spoke of what happened. Not to the authorities, not to anyone. The car was never recovered, buried somewhere deep in the snow. I don't know where to begin. For obvious reasons, I can't share my name or too many specifics, but I feel like I need to get this out. Maybe it's my way of dealing with what I've seen. Maybe it's a warning. I'm a scientist, a researcher specifically. I work with an aerospace organization in the UK that frequently studies space debris, both natural and man-made. Most of the time, it's routine. Fragments of old satellites, discarded rocket parts, or even the occasional meteorite. Nothing groundbreaking. About 6 months ago, we were contacted about a crash site in a remote area. A satellite had fallen to Earth, and the government wanted it examined. This wasn't out of the ordinary. Satellites come down all the time when their orbits decay. What was unusual was the lack of any identifiable origin. When the wreckage arrived at our lab, we got our first good look at it. The design was familiar, like something straight out of the Cold War era. It had the look of an old Soviet satellite, with scorched metal panels and even faint markings. But there was something not right about it, something I couldn't put my finger on at first. The black box, for instance. Every satellite has a data recorder, but this one was unlike anything I'd seen. It was a matte black cube, entirely seamless, with no visible ports or panels. It shouldn't have survived the crash intact, but there it was, pristine amidst the mangled wreckage. My team set to work analyzing it. We ran every test imaginable, X-rays, thermal imaging, even acoustic scans. No result made sense. The material wasn't on any periodic table. It absorbed every frequency of light we shone on it, giving no reflections or signatures. The turning point came when we managed to open it, or rather when it opened itself. We'd been applying different frequencies of sound to it, hoping to resonate with whatever mechanism sealed it. After hours of experimenting, it responded. The sides of the box shifted, folding in on themselves until the interior was exposed. Inside were tiny crystalline structures, arranged in a lattice that seemed to pulse faintly. It was beautiful, hypnotic even, but it wasn't the structure itself that disturbed me, it was what was stored in it. The black box was a data repository containing what looked like images and recordings. At first, we assumed it was telemetry data or environmental readings from orbit. But as we decoded the signals, it became clear these were visual recordings of Earth. There were high-resolution images of cities, images of people, streets, even specific individuals. The timestamps were precise, matching dates that spanned decades. The recordings weren't limited to aerial views either. Some were taken at ground level. Entire conversations were documented, private ones, in impossible detail. And then there were the faces. Faces of people who never noticed they were being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up when I realized that some of those people had vanished years ago. The box wasn't just storing information, it was gathering it. We tried to trace its origin, but every lead was a dead end. The markings on the exterior weren't Russian after all. They were mimicry designed to fool us. The technology inside was light years ahead of anything we've ever seen. Whoever, or whatever, built this didn't just want to blend in. They wanted to watch us undetected. As word spread through the lab, the atmosphere grew tense. Some of my colleagues stopped coming in, claiming illness or family emergencies. Others refused to work near the box altogether. Things escalated when the box began to emit a low hum. It wasn't random, it was rhythmic, almost like a code. We scrambled to decipher it, but before we could, the government intervened. A team arrived in unmarked vehicles and confiscated everything. The wreckage, our notes, even the hard drives from our computers. We were told to forget it ever happened. That's the official line. But how do you forget something like this? Whoever sent it is still out there, watching, spying, and gathering information about us all. We've just got back from what was supposed to be a relaxing holiday. I don't know how to process everything that happened. A family friend offered us their holiday home for a week, a little stone cottage in the countryside. It was picturesque, surrounded by rolling hills and no neighbors for miles. Perfect for unwinding. When we arrived, there was a note waiting for us on the kitchen counter. Just some friendly instructions: how to use the wood-burning stove, what to do with the rubbish, and a stern warning: don't open the cellar door under any circumstances. It seemed odd, but not unheard of. Maybe it was unsafe, or maybe they were storing something private. Either way, we didn't question it. The first few days were idyllic: walks through the fields, family dinners, card games by the fire. It began with noises: a feint, a creak here, a thud there. Old houses make noises, we told ourselves. But by the fourth night, the sounds became unmistakable. Something was moving downstairs. We tried to rationalize it: animals in the walls, the wind pushing on the old structure. None of us said it aloud, but we were all on edge. My youngest, Beth, seemed the least bothered. In fact, she'd started spending more time near the cellar. I caught her sitting by the door a couple of times, just staring at it. When I asked her what she was doing, she shrugged and said she was just talking to it. I hoped it was just my child's imagination. She started whispering to herself or to something when she thought no one was listening. She drew pictures in her notebook, dark scribbles of long shapes and wide eyes. It unnerved me, but I didn't want to scare her by making a fuss. The noises escalated. What started as occasional knocks turned into loud, frantic banging in the middle of the night. The sound echoed through the house, shaking the floorboards. When we checked the cellar door the next morning, nothing seemed out of place. It was locked tight, just as we'd found it. Beth became withdrawn. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't play, and refused to sleep anywhere but by the cellar door. She kept muttering things like, "It wants to come up," or "It's lonely down there." I tried to move her, but she screamed in a way I've never heard before, like something else entirely was coming out of her. The final night was when everything fell apart. The banging was so loud it felt like the entire house would collapse. I could hear the hinges straining, the lock rattling as if it was moments from snapping. Beth was sitting at the door, whispering something under her breath. Her voice wasn't her own, it was deeper, like she was speaking through clenched teeth. I tried to grab her, to pull her away, but she wouldn't budge. She kept staring at the door, her eyes wide and unblinking. "It's coming," she said. The lock snapped. Beth swung the door open. I didn't see what came out. I don't think I could have comprehended it if I had, but the smell was suffocating and the air felt electric, like the moment before a lightning strike. I grabbed Beth and ran upstairs, shouting for my husband and our eldest. We locked ourselves in the bedroom and waited until the noises stopped. When we finally worked up the courage to leave, the cellar door was shut again. The lock was back in place, as if nothing had happened. We packed our things and left before sunrise. I've tried to contact our friend to ask what they know about that house, but they're not responding. I'm not even sure I want to know the truth. Beth hasn't been the same since we got home. She's quiet. At night I hear her whispering again, and I'm terrified of what she might be saying. I haven't told anyone else what happened. I'm scared they'll think I've lost it. But I keep waking up to the sound of faint knocking from the basement in our own house.